I'm Botanical Lich, and here is the bee. If it's close to when I wrote this, then I doubt many of you would actually need an explanation as to why I'm discussing this topic. But it wouldn't make for much of a video if I just had the word insulin up on the screen for 20 minutes. So, constructive capitalism. Insulin. At this time, insulin, a drug many people need to live, has a massively inflated price, even with the price moderation set in place by the government, if that's even still happening. The cause is that, to my knowledge, there is no cheap generic version of insulin. This is not because there is no formula for insulin that has fallen out of patent, but because every single company that is capable of creating a generic version refuses to do so. Each company, whether explicitly or tacitly, has agreed not to put out a cheap form of insulin. Instead, they continue to update their insulin formulations, creation methods, and delivery methods. They stop producing forms of the drug that have fallen out of patent protection industry-wide. They cite fractional increases in effectiveness or usability as an excuse to keep these drugs under patent. And yes, fractional increases in those things are important. That is the march of progress, but I have a hard time believing that the reason a drug company is changing their formulation is altruistic when they use half a percentage increase in efficacy to delay a 90% drop in price. That's the rub. Generic versions of these drugs are generally sold for much less, sometimes as little as 90% of the price. These companies would much rather get $50 per dose than $5. So, what could a little billionaire do against such powerful companies? How could constructive capitalism affect such a large industry? First, I'd like to talk about what constructive capitalism is. Constructive capitalism is an explanation of ways that I think someone could use $1 billion to make the world a better place. I'm not an expert on anything. I barely got a psychology degree at college and have spent the rest of my life since doing manual labor. I wanted this part of the project to be just that. Observations from a layman who is just looking at the state of the world and trying to help. I also want to stress that these essays are going to come out in no particular order. One topic being presented before another does not mean that I think it deserves more attention or more money. It just means that's the video I felt like recording at the time. There are some other caveats that I could make here, but I don't really see the point. I have a whole other video about how I would use some of my money for my own selfish desires to convince you that I'm not an unrealistic paragon of philanthropy. You can find it if you want to. But if you want to get straight into the meat of it, I recommend watching this video. So what's a little billionaire to do? Just buy a lab. I would hire some people who were able to create off-patent insulin products and start producing low-cost insulin. Actually, I think this plan would be manageable with a much lower price point than the $750 million I've given myself to play with. With a few $1,000,000, someone should be able to start a small insulin distribution project. The company could supply a decent-sized population at a retail price that could be cheaper than name-brand drugs, even after most insurance plans. This could be possible. It costs about $2 to $4 to create a vial of insulin, which means even with the higher price of a small-scale operation, it would be possible for me to undercut the $250 retail price of a standard vial, all while insurance was covering 90% of that second vial. If I were to allow for a small profit, then I could slowly increase the company's scope of influence, eventually providing low-cost insulin to any who need it. As I will continue to say, I don't think wealth and profit are inherently evil. I do think, however, that they come with an imperative to do work to enhance the lives of your customers, or society as a whole, beyond that of just providing a product. Conspiracy alert! Insurance collusion. You may wonder why I have to point out that I would specifically be selling it cheaper at retail than most other insulin is while being covered by insurance. Now, this is simply conjecture, but it is possible that if I were to attempt to provide a low-cost insulin, many insurers would not cover it. There would be many excuses not to do so, including my drug not being the, quote, best available product. However, there are some people who might believe that the real reason is that a cheaper product wouldn't be as beneficial to the insurance companies. Those people would say that the cost profit sharing that insurers have been said to have with large pharmaceutical companies would be the cause. Basically, some people have claimed that drug companies give the insurers a discount, which the drug company gets to write off as a loss. Then, the insurer quotes you for the full price of the drug and gets to cover less of the price than they tell you that they are. There would be some insurers who could be forced to cover my product because of generics clauses in their policies, but those could be written out of their contracts when a new insurance year started. All that to say, yes, my prices would likely have to be competitive at retail versus other brands' insurance pricing in order to help the most people. That is not to say, however, that my main objective is for the most people to benefit. I would like my drug to help those that need it most, namely, low-income and uninsured people who have diabetes. So if I had a limited supply of product, I would make sure that my insulin was getting to those people first. If the world is lucky by the time I have $1 billion, I don't expect it to happen quickly. The price of insulin and many other prescription drugs may have fallen far enough that it would no longer be necessary for me to create this sort of stopgap solution. Note for my lawyer, when drafting the contract with the left-wing influencers, include a clause where I don't have to complete any tasks that are no longer necessary to repair the fabric of society. Thanks, Nancy. Frankly, I believe it would be best if the United States adopted a single-payer healthcare system, and that no prescription drug would cost any person any amount of money to acquire. Instead, it would be covered in the governmental contract as a benefit of paying taxes. Aside, charity credits. Speaking of taxes, charity tax credits may make sense if taken at face value. In order to get the wealthy and the ultra-wealthy to voluntarily redistribute a portion of their wealth, we allow them to deduct the amount that they give to charity from their income for that year. It's frequently called philanthropy, and it is actually going to come up quite a bit in this video series. If you tilt your head just a little, don't charity tax credits allow the wealthy to reduce the amount of money that they pay to the government?
That's taxes.
Which will assume that the government would use to benefit the public as a whole?
They don't always.
And instead, the wealthy get to use that money
I admit, a larger amount.
to help very specific groups of people that the wealthy get to hand pick? This could help explain why millions of dollars are spent each year on pretty rare diseases, while common life-threatening diseases like diabetes don't have many high-visibility charities. Now let's flip the charity tax credits over and take a look at the back end. 501c3s allow private companies and individuals to put large amounts of money into private charities. The owners of these charities are allowed to make most of the hiring and payment decisions, as well as allowed to decide where that money goes. On top of that, they are only required to pay out 5% of their assets as donations each year. An owner of one of these charities could pay themselves millions of dollars a year in benefits, meals, travel, etc., on top of a salary as an executive of the charity that they themselves are donating to. Realistically, much of the money donated to these private charities may never see true charitable use. Tangent to the aside. The lottery and charity. Speaking of large sums of money, when you win a large amount of money in the lottery, the government asks you to pay the estimated taxes on that income up front. A question arises. Are these taxes separate from income taxes? Let's say you donate what you had left over after those initial taxes to a 501c3 that you had just set up in your own name. Maybe one dedicated to helping low-income people pay for their insulin. Could you then expect a massive refund from the IRS? A question I could probably search up or ask my accountant. If I had an accountant. which I would if I won the lottery. I'd hire one. Of course, if this is how I stored my $1 billion, the majority of money in my 501c3 would see charity use. See the contract video that I may or may not have already made. Tangent to the tangent, to my aside. Speaking of charity, what is charity? Like, legally? Here are some questions I have relating to my insulin plan. In the case that I created a generic insulin product, could I compare my pricing to other insulin products on the market and call the difference charity? Could I compare my profits or my percentage profits and then write off the difference as charity? If I could prove that I could sell my insulin for $50 but was selling it for $25, could I claim that $25 discount was actually charitable giving? Or could I give away the same amount of insulin that I sold? If I did, could I report my adjusted income as 0 for each sale? Why or why not? Please turn to the person you're watching this video with, or a complete stranger, and discuss. If the insulin crisis has been solved by the time you're watching this, I'm sure there are still plenty of other drugs that could benefit from cost undercutting. That is, unless the society that you're living in has adopted universal healthcare as a human right, then maybe this entire video is an irrelevant relic of the past. So, what the fuck are rich people doing? The purpose of this section isn't just to say that rich people are inherently evil, but instead to relay my observations about the behaviors of rich people and companies in these spaces, then examine those actions versus what I believe would be good for society, and then to compare the actions of the rich with what I think would be good for common people. Unfortunately for this one, rich people seem to be diametrically opposed to me. Rich people are the ones who are setting the prices for insulin so high, and are increasing their profit margins for the good of themselves and their shareholders, rather than decreasing the profits for the good of the people who need to use their drugs. The idea that no drug company is willing to make a cheap insulin brand to undercut the market is mind-boggling to me, and is a clear case of not only a failure in the competitive market theory, but also an example that shows that being profitable isn't enough anymore. Businesses need to make the most profit for any given investment. I do expect to usually be able to make a little more of a counter-argument for the rich people. A lich's advocate kind of thing. But I'm seriously drawing a blank here, which may end up becoming a reoccurring theme. I don't know. I haven't made those videos yet. Let me know if you can think of a good argument other than money on behalf of the people and companies profiting off high-priced insulin. By the way, but their R&D budget argument is basically just the money argument. Also, the government already pays for a good portion of medical research. Furthermore, I can't in good faith accept R&D as an argument because part of what they are researching and developing are new forms of insulin so that they can keep charging high prices. This call to action is going to be similar to the last one. As I said, that video is about how I would selfishly spend a portion of my imaginary $1 billion as a mea culpa to spouting all of this, rich people have a moral imperative to do more for those less well off. So don't feel obligated to go watch it, even if it is linked in the description, and probably in your recommended videos right now. As for the call, I think that there are a lot of people that get stuck in a place where emotionally they feel like they should be helping others, but in reality, they could really use some help themselves. Existing in that place is tough. It is heavy with guilt and shame. I thought about that guilt and shame and came up with what I think is a reasonable starting place. Make one person's day better. Every day, or every week, or every month, whatever you're capable of. That person doesn't need to be a stranger. It can be your mom, or your coworker, or your friend. You can make it better by giving them money, or things, or time. Don't underestimate how much offering to look after a friend's children can mean to them. I tell my friends that if they need to, they can sleep on my floor for 2 weeks. And it's made a couple of them tear up. You might be surprised who in your life could be in a position where just that promise of safety and comfort is a big thing for them. We can worry about doing more later, and we will. But starting to act can be one of the hardest steps on a journey. By making a small difference wherever you can, you may find yourself becoming more and more involved in charity and other aid actions naturally. So, for now, make one person's day better, however you feel comfortable doing so.